I still remember the exact moment when everything started to unravel. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, mindlessly passing time. That's when the message came through. A message that wasn't meant for me, but somehow it was exactly what I needed to see. My heart stopped as I read those words over and over again. At first, I didn't understand. I didn't want to understand. But the sinking feeling in my stomach told me that this wasn't a mistake. It couldn't be. It had been months since my mom remarried, and life had been different. Tom, her new husband, was polite, helpful, and even charming at times. Too charming, maybe. At first, I thought I was imagining it. The way his eyes lingered a little too long, the casual compliments that felt more personal than they should have been. I told myself I was overthinking. I told myself it didn't mean anything. But that text was different. It was like a crack in the surface, a small glimpse into something I wasn't supposed to see. My hands shook as I picked up the phone. I knew I shouldn't, but I tapped the screen anyway, scrolling through the messages. What I saw made my blood run cold. Before we get into this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss more real-life stories like this one. Your support really helps. My name is Claire. I'm 23 years old, and for the most part, I've always considered myself pretty grounded. Life hasn't been easy, especially after my parents' divorce a few years ago, but I've managed to hold it together. My mom, Susan, has always been my rock. She's the kind of person who doesn't back down from a challenge, even when life throws everything at her. The divorce was hard on both of us, though in different ways. For me, it was losing the sense of security I'd grown up with. For her, it was about starting over. My dad wasn't exactly the most reliable person. After the split, he drifted further and further away until the occasional birthday card or phone call became the most I could expect from him. When Tom came into the picture, I wanted to believe it was a good thing. My mom deserved to be happy, and Tom seemed perfect, on the surface at least. He was polite, charming, and had this way of making people feel like they were the only person in the room. My mom fell for him hard, and honestly, I didn't blame her. For the first time in years, she was laughing again, smiling like she didn't have the weight of the world on her shoulders. At first, I thought maybe he could be good for both of us. He tried to connect with me, asking about my life, my job, my interests. He even made an effort to remember the little things, like how I loved peppermint tea or that I couldn't stand cilantro. It felt nice at first, like he was trying to build a relationship. But then, there were the compliments. They started off harmless enough. "You've got great taste in clothes," or "That color looks really nice on you." Stuff anyone might say. But then, they started to feel different, more personal. Once, he told me, "You've got a smile that could stop traffic." It wasn't just what he said, though. It was how he said it. Like he wasn't talking to his stepdaughter, but to someone else entirely. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe he was just being nice. But the more it happened, the harder it became to ignore. It wasn't just the compliments either. It was the way he acted when my mom wasn't around. There was this one evening I'll never forget. My mom had a work event and wouldn't be home until late. I came back from work, tired and ready to just collapse in my room. But when I walked in, Tom was there, waiting in the kitchen. He smiled at me, casual as ever, and said, "Rough day? Want me to fix you something to eat?" I told him no, but he didn't leave. He just stood there, leaning against the counter, watching me. I remember feeling so uncomfortable, but I didn't know what to say. It wasn't like he was doing anything wrong, at least not on the surface. But there was something in his tone, in the way he looked at me, that made my skin crawl. It wasn't just that one time either. There were little things, moments that seemed insignificant at first but added up over time. Like how he always seemed to know when I'd be home alone, or how he'd knock on my door for no real reason, asking if I needed anything or just starting random conversations. It felt off. And once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. I started avoiding him as much as I could, staying late at work, spending more time in my room, and finding excuses to leave the house whenever my mom wasn't around. I didn't tell her any of this. How could I? She was so happy, so in love. I didn't want to ruin that for her. But then there was the text. That single message that changed everything. I was sitting in the living room, scrolling through my phone, when I saw it buzzing on the table. It wasn't my phone, it was his. The screen lit up for just a second, long enough for me to read the words. "Are you alone? I'll be there soon." My heart stopped. At first, I thought I must have read it wrong. I picked up the phone, my hands shaking, and opened the message. And that's when I saw them. All of them. Message after message, each one more damning than the last. At that moment, it felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. After that text, every interaction with Tom felt heavier, like there was some unspoken tension hanging in the air. I started noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. Little comments he'd make, the way his eyes would follow me when I walked into a room. It wasn't just the compliments anymore. He seemed genuinely interested in every detail of my life. Too interested. He'd ask me about my plans, who I was meeting, and what I was doing after work. At first, it seemed like he was just being polite, trying to connect like any step-parent might. But then he started bringing up things he shouldn't have known, things I hadn't told him. I realized he must have been checking my social media. He'd mentioned posts I'd made weeks ago, casually slipping them into conversation. "How was that concert last month? You looked like you were having a great time." Or, "That friend of yours, the one you were tagged with, she seems nice. Do you two hang out often?" It made my stomach turn, but I didn't confront him. I wasn't sure how to. One evening, I overheard him talking to my mom in the kitchen. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but their voices carried down the hall. At first, it sounded like a normal conversation. Work, dinner plans, stuff like that. But then I heard him say something that stopped me in my tracks. "We just need to keep things in the past, Susan. There's no point in dredging it all up now." I froze. What did he mean by that? Keep what in the past? I stayed by the door, straining to hear more, but their voices dropped, and I couldn't make out anything else. My mind started racing, piecing together every strange moment, every uneasy feeling. I told myself it could have been nothing, but deep down, I knew better. Then there was the package. It arrived a few days later, a plain, unmarked box addressed to Tom. He rarely got mail. Most of the bills were in my mom's name, so it caught my attention right away. I noticed it sitting on the counter when I came home from work, but by the time I went back to grab a snack, it was gone. I saw him later that evening, heading into the garage with it tucked under his arm. I wanted to ask him about it, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Part of me was scared of what he might say. Part of me didn't want to know. The tension between us kept building. My mom had a business trip coming up, a weekend away at some conference. She mentioned it over dinner, and I could feel Tom's eyes on me as she spoke. "I'll be gone for a few days," she said. You two should try to spend some time together while I'm away. Maybe have dinner or something." I forced a smile, nodding along like everything was fine, but inside I was panicking. The thought of being alone with him for an entire weekend made my skin crawl. I tried to make plans to stay with a friend, but at the last minute, she canceled. That Saturday morning, my mom left early, kissing me on the cheek as she headed out the door. "Take care of each other," she said with a smile. The house felt emptier without her, quieter. I stayed in my room for most of the day, trying to avoid Tom, but he kept finding excuses to check in. He knocked on my door around lunchtime, asking if I wanted anything to eat. I told him I wasn't hungry. Later, I went to grab a book from the living room, and when I opened it, a small piece of paper fell out. I picked it up, my hands shaking as I unfolded it. The note was written in block letters, simple and direct. "I need to talk to you privately." I stared at the words, my heart racing. Who had written it? Tom? It had to be. But why? And what did he want to talk about? I put the note back in the book, my mind spinning with questions. That night, he knocked on my door again, this time asking if I wanted to watch a movie. I made up an excuse, saying I wasn't feeling well, and he didn't press me. But I could feel his presence, the weight of him lingering outside the door before he finally walked away. Every time I tried to calm myself down, another piece of the puzzle would surface, making it impossible to ignore. The compliments, the messages, the package, the note. It was all adding up to something I didn't want to face. I told myself I needed more proof, something concrete before I could say anything to my mom. But the thought of waiting, of letting this continue, made me feel like I was suffocating. And then, just when I thought I couldn't handle anymore, something happened that changed everything. I remember the night so vividly that even now, I can still feel the chill that crept into the room. My mom had been gone all day at her conference, and I had spent most of the evening locked away in my room, trying to focus on anything but the tension that had been building between Tom and me. It was around 9 p.m. when I decided to venture out. I needed water, and I was determined to be quick about it. I figured if I didn't make eye contact, didn't linger, I could grab what I needed and get back to the safety of my room without having to engage with him. As I stepped into the dimly lit kitchen, I heard his footsteps behind me. My heart sank. "Hey," he said softly, his voice closer than I expected. I froze for a moment, gripping the glass in my hand, then forced myself to turn around. He was standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "I was just getting some water," I mumbled, hoping he'd take the hint and leave me alone. But he didn't. Instead, he stepped closer. "Claire, we need to talk." I shook my head. "It's late. I'm tired. Whatever it is, it can wait." "No," he said, his tone firmer now. "It can't." Before I could react, he closed the distance between us. I stepped back instinctively, but there was nowhere to go. My back hit the counter as he leaned in, his hand brushing against my arm. "Tom, stop," I said, my voice shaking. "I can't help it," he said, his words making my skin crawl. "You're beautiful, Claire. I've tried to ignore it, but I can't anymore. Stop!" I said again, louder this time, cutting him off. I pushed past him, my hands trembling as I tried to create some distance between us, but he didn't let up. "I'm not trying to hurt you," he said, his voice soft, almost pleading. I care about you. That's all. You have to understand." I turned to face him, my fear giving way to anger. "No, Tom. I don't have to understand anything. This is wrong, and you know it. Stay away from me." He stared at me, his face a mix of desperation and frustration. For a moment, I thought he might argue, might try to justify himself further. But then he took a step back, his shoulders slumping. "I didn't mean to upset you," he said quietly. I don't know how else to say it." I didn't respond. I didn't trust myself to speak. Instead, I walked past him, grabbing my phone from the table on my way back to my room. Once I was safely inside, I locked the door and called the only person I could think of, my dad. When he picked up, I could barely get the words out. "Dad," I said, my voice trembling. "I need your help." He listened as I told him everything. Every compliment, every look, every moment that had led up to tonight. And when I was done, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Claire," he said finally, his voice heavy. "There's something you need to know about Tom." I felt my stomach tighten. "What is it?" He hesitated, then said, "This isn't the first time he's done something like this. When your mom first started seeing him, I did some digging. I didn't want to tell you because I thought it was in the past, but he's been accused of inappropriate behavior before, with younger women. I didn't think he'd try anything with you, or I would have said something sooner." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't know whether to feel angry, betrayed, or just numb. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice breaking. "I thought I was protecting you," he said, "but I was wrong. I'm sorry, Claire." I hung up, my mind racing. I couldn't let this go on. I needed proof, something concrete that my mom couldn't ignore. The next day, I waited for my chance. I set my phone to record and confronted Tom in the living room, careful to keep my tone calm and neutral. I asked him why he had acted the way he did, and why he had said those things to me. And, as expected, he tried to play it off. But eventually, his words betrayed him. "It's not like I did anything wrong," he said. "I've just always felt a connection with you, Claire. That's not a crime." I stopped the recording as soon as he left the room. My hands were shaking as I replayed the audio, but I knew I finally had what I needed. That evening, I sat my mom down and played her the recording. At first, she didn't believe it. She looked at me like I was lying, like I had fabricated the whole thing. But as she listened, her expression shifted from disbelief to shock, then to anger. "Claire," she said when it was over, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you sure this is real?" "I wouldn't make something like this up," I said. The next day, we had a family dinner planned with some extended relatives. My mom insisted we go, acting like nothing was wrong. But when we were all gathered around the table, she stood up and confronted Tom in front of everyone. "I know what you did," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "And I want you out of my house." The room fell silent as everyone turned to stare. Tom tried to deny it, but my mom wasn't having it. She played the recording for everyone to hear, and by the time it was over, there was no doubt about what had happened. Tom left that night, and my mom filed for divorce soon after. It was messy and it was painful, but in the end, we were free. Free from his lies, his manipulations, and his presence in our lives. Looking back, I wish I had spoken up sooner. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that silence only gives power to those who don't deserve it. After Tom left, the house felt different. The air wasn't as heavy, and for the first time in a long time, I could sit in the living room without feeling like I needed to watch my back. My mom filed for divorce within a week. She didn't hesitate, and honestly, I think she was as angry at herself as she was at him. She sat me down one evening, a few days after he moved out, and said, "Claire, I need to apologize. I should have seen the signs. I should have listened to you sooner." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to yell, to ask her why she let it go so far, but I could see the pain in her eyes. She looked broken in a way I hadn't seen before. So instead of saying all the things I was feeling, I just nodded and said, "I know, Mom. It's okay." But it wasn't okay. Not yet, anyway. I started therapy shortly after. My dad offered to pay for it, which surprised me, but I think he felt guilty. He told me once, during one of our phone calls, that he regretted not stepping in sooner. "I thought I was protecting you," he said, "but all I did was make things harder for you. I'm sorry, Claire." Those words stuck with me. For so long, I had felt like I was carrying everything on my own. The weight of my parents' divorce, the tension with Tom, the fear of not being believed. But in that moment, I realized I didn't have to carry it alone anymore. Therapy helped more than I expected. At first, it was hard to open up, to talk about everything that had happened. But little by little, I started to let go of the guilt and the anger I'd been holding on to. I stopped blaming myself for not speaking up sooner, and I started to rebuild the trust that Tom had shattered. My mom and I started to grow closer too. She made an effort to be more present, to really listen when I talked. There were still moments when the memory of everything that had happened would creep up on us, an awkward silence during dinner, a glance at an old photo, but we faced those moments together. One day, she said to me, "I think I was so focused on being happy that I ignored what was right in front of me. I let my guard down because I wanted to believe he was good for us." I didn't have an answer for her. What could I say? That she should have known? That she should have protected me better? Those thoughts crossed my mind, but I knew they wouldn't change anything. What mattered was that she was trying now, and for the first time, I believed her when she said she wouldn't let anything like this happen again. As for Tom, I never saw him again. I heard through the grapevine that he had tried to start over in a different town, but I didn't care enough to follow up. He was out of our lives, and that was all that mattered to me. Looking back, the whole experience feels like a blur, like something that happened to someone else. But every now and then, I'll catch myself thinking about it. The way his words made my skin crawl. The look on my mom's face when she finally heard the truth. It's not something you just forget. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that trusting your instincts is more important than anything. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And no matter how much you want to believe in someone, no matter how much you want things to be okay, you have to be willing to face the truth. Life has moved on since then. I've moved on. I'm stronger now, more sure of myself than I ever was before. And while I can't change what happened, I can use it as a reminder of how far I've come. Sometimes, the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones who let you down the most. But that doesn't mean you have to carry their mistakes with you forever. You can choose to let go, to grow, to heal. And that's exactly what I'm doing. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt like you couldn't speak up, like you had to keep quiet because no one would believe you, don't. Speak up. Trust yourself. You deserve to be heard. You deserve to be safe. And you deserve to move forward, no matter how hard it feels in the moment. This isn't just my story. It's a reminder that no matter how dark things get, there's always a way out. You just have to take the first step. Betrayal like this leaves scars, but it also teaches us about resilience, about finding strength we didn't know we had. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have spoken up sooner? Would you have handled it differently? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below. And if stories of betrayal, justice, and resilience inspire you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. There's so much more to explore, and I'd love for you to join me on this journey. Do you think my mom should have seen the signs earlier, or was she simply doing her best in a difficult situation? Let's discuss in the comments. Your perspective matters.